Hello, my name is Dr. Kwasu David Tembo. I'm a full-time lecturer in the English Literature Department at Lancaster University. And I'd like to just, by way of introduction to Orson Welles' 1962 adaptation of Franz Kafka's 1925 text, The Trial, just as an introduction, share with you some observations, some orienteering notes that I've taken down when I watched the film, which I think is a perfect summation and reflection of the discontents of our time in so many ways. And it perfectly captures those in surreal, beautiful, slightly disturbing, deeply humorous ways. I think coming out of the Duke's recent Lynch programming, it's not unapparent to me how very similar The Trial is to Eraserhead, for example, both in terms of style and tone. There's this shared sensibility of industrial surreality, of this kind of numinous menace, the terrorisms of bureaucracy, this kind of constant drone you hear sonically in the background, this industrial sonic profile that they both share, the deadpan delivery of dialogue, which is still highly emotive, sometimes even melodramatic. And in this sense, I think the Lynchian owes much to the Wellesian, and both owe much to the Kafkaesque. And indeed, I think, as I said earlier, I think it's a perfect film to capture these contemporary discontents that we have, because our time is a time marred and marked by the absence or recession of due process, the horrible whimsy and lumbering brutality of the state. I mean, there's this kind of absurdity of the law, of surveillance and censorship. It's very much like 1984 if it was kind of a black comedy, which I think is a perfect description of our time. A time which is kind of charged with an abstract, which is concretely exacting, a kind of numinous body without organs of power and paranoia. It's diffuse, it's dispersed, so that it applies to everyone and everything, and equally nothing and no one at all. And in this way, I think Orson Welles' The Trial is an important forerunner to Peter Weir's Truman Show, Sidney Lumet's Network, Gary Ross's Pleasantville, David Fincher's The Game, or David Cronenberg's Existenz, of Scott Beck and Brian Wood's Heretic, even the Wachowskis' The Matrix, Joseph Rusnack's The 13th Floor, Lorcan Finnegan's Vivarium, and of course, Terry Gilliam's Brazil. And so, to conclude these remarks, I might just read my own reflections from my own film journal, which, parroting Wells, I guess could be said to have the structure of a dream. Quote, Karis Namek from Tony Gilroy's Andor writes an untitled journal or manifesto, known to some in the diegesis as Nemec's Manifesto or The Trial of Political Consciousness. In it, we see and hear some of the best the Gilroy brothers have to offer in terms of the writing for the series. And Tony Gilroy, speaking through Nemec, writes, quote, tyranny requires constant effort. It breaks. It leaks. Authority is brittle, end quote. This effort, this brittleness, is something Marx discusses in his fragment on machines, this idea of a metabolic rift, a rupture, a breaking apart, or as Amy Wendling says, quote, capitalism is like a poorly designed steam engine that must be run at top speed despite the fact that the speed contributes to a greater overall heat that can be neither transformed into productive work or released in adequate quantities. Instead, it threatens to blow up the engine itself, end quote. This leak, this rupture, this break, this charge, this rift can, when aestheticized, take the form of tragedy, horror, and indeed farce. And in Wells' adaptation of Kafka's text, all three forms of the brittle tyranny of power come together in the mythopoetics of the law and its idiosyncrasies and nosiness, in its panoptic prurience and perversion and egomania, its meandering morbidity, its sloppy impositions, importunements, and interrogatives, its cavalcade of colorless bureaucrats and lackeys, inspectors, clerks, neighbors, colleagues, lovers. It treats them all as dazed instruments for a clumsy ovular mechanics of mismanagement. Its busy work, its miserly traps and greed, the vagaries of its trivial grammar that cannot leaven the leaden weight of its acts of brutal misanthropy, its severe stencils, its bad readings of abstract arrest that make a complaint of innocence, or records basic rights as gibberish and babbling, ostensibly acquitted to freedom. It leaves nothing else but permanent guilt over something you don't even know or is or was missing. And each to each denounced and flogged, everybody complained against, keeping a paranoid patience which is both datified with love and terror. It all comes together in the form of a beautiful, surreal, darkly funny nightmare.